Hello, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Reformed Tired Girls Club podcast. I am your host, Heather. And as always, if you like this episode, if you like this podcast, like it, love it, and want to like, subscribe, comment, leave me a review, anything that you feel called to do that really helps me, helps the podcast. And I really, really, really do appreciate it. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about depression. A little bit. No, we're going to be talking about depression and how your mental health and your depression starts bleeding into other areas of your life, and it affects your work, it affects your social life, and that's a hard pill to swallow. It can be a hard pill to swallow, especially if people aren't aware of your depression and you haven't really spoken openly to people about this. As always, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my experience with my depression. I'm so grateful and thankful and happy to say that I have not s- dealt with depression in years, but depression is something that I did deal with for a very long time. And at the end of the episode, I'll also get into how my depression went away and what I did and to make it gone for good. But yeah, really excited to talk about this because I have a story that I really impacted me and I still think of to this day. But without further ado, let's talk about it, shall we? So depression is such it's such a I don't want to say it's a finicky thing, but it's a tricky thing, right? Because sometimes, depending who you are and your experience with it, it can be something that's very consistent, or it can be something that's really sporadic, and there are different factors at play that influence depression. And, for me, what would be really annoying, if I'll say, is hanging out with friends and then all of a sudden you just get hit with it out of the blue. I remember it like I'm fine 1 second and then next minute I'm like, oh no. Oh no. And it's really hard to explain because it's like a complete 180. You're fine 1 minute and then the next minute you're like, I'm sad. I'm sad. And then you're like, okay, I need to go home. I am not in the headspace and I don't have the mental capacity to be hanging out with my friends anymore, to be going out right now. And so, it's like, what do? You're like, I have a headache. I have a stomach ache. Something like some kind of excuse to excuse yourself from the situation, right? Or it can be something like you are getting ready to go out with friends, or friends are trying to make plans with you, and you're just not in the mood. You're just not in the mood. You just want to crawl into bed with your ice cream and you want to turn on Netflix and you just want to zen out, numb out. And it can be really hard to explain to friends. I'm thinking back in, 2016, 2017, that era where again, we didn't really talk about our mental health and we didn't say like, oh, I'm depressed, you know? And so it's like, what do you say to people when they're trying to make plans with you or you're like in the middle of a fun night out and it can just hit you out of nowhere and it can be really hard to explain to people. And it could be like that. Sometimes it just hits you out of nowhere, or it can be something that's just always humming in the background, if I will. I'm trying to think of like a good way to describe this. For me, when I was younger, it was more of that humming always in the background. But when I moved out, it was more so of a sporadic experience. And I think that talks a lot to my home environment and the effect that that had on me. But so it did get better moving out, but it was still a thing. It was still a thing and it was a very powerful thing. And especially when it just hit me out of the blue and I would just be stuck in a funk for days. It's like a mental health hangover, if you want to call it that. It can be really hard to communicate this to your friends and to your loved ones. And then you end up just making some kind of excuse for why you can't go out or why you want to go home, and just saying like, oh, you have a headache is such an easier, more acceptable excuse than to say, oh, I just don't feel up for it. And so when I'm talking about, your mental health and your depression, leading into plans with friends and hanging out with friends, it also bleeds into your work, right? I worked as a server for about 8 years of my life, and I specifically remember the breakfast restaurant that I worked at. I remember when I would wake up some days and I would just be like, "Nah, man, I'm sad. I'm sad today," and no particular reason. And I would go to work, and on these days, it was really, really hard. I was just hoping that no one would look at me too long to be like, "Oh, what's wrong?" Or to be like, you're different today. Something's off." Because when I was in these moments of my depression while I was serving, not only are you conjuring up the energy to work as a server in a fast-paced environment, and you have to be, that friendly face like, "Hi, what can I get for you?" But, it takes a lot of energy to do that, and I remember having those days, and I would just not be very talkative. I would usually have my ball cap on, but I will never forget, I had a table, and it was towards the end of my shift, and I was just going through the motions. It was this woman and it was her 2 kids, and she I was getting her a to-go cup for her coffee. I was filling her a fresh cup of coffee in a to-go cup for her because it was at her and her 2 kids were done with their meals, and, they were really young kids, so she had her hands full, and I brought her to-go coffee. And she stops and she looks at me and she asks, "Can I pray for you?" And it took me really off guard because it wasn't common for me to have people notice when I was in a funk. And I had, I've had many days where I was serving and I was in one of my funks, and no one has ever called attention to it. And I really appreciated her too also asking me if she could pray for me, because growing up, I also had religion really shoved down my throat, and I have no shade against religion, just in my life and in my personal experience. I have a little bit of an interesting relationship with religion because it was just forced upon me so heavily. And I'm not religious now, or was I at the moment when this woman asked me if she could pray for me. But the fact that she asked and not just said, like, "I'm going to pray for you," I really noticed details in the little things, and that was a little thing that I really, really, really appreciated, and I really was like, "Yes, absolutely." I started crying to this woman, and I felt so embarrassed, but she was so sweet, and she left me a really, really nice tip. And I kept that receipt, and I still have it to this day. I like to keep things. I have boxes of memorabilia from different points in my life, and, when something means a lot to me, if I have a little keepsake from that experience, I keep it. And I kept her receipt with her tip, and then she wrote on the receipt, "Thank you for your joy," which was also something that really struck a chord with me, because if you've listened to episode 1, you know that my middle name is Joy, and I had a really interesting relationship and towards my middle name. I don't know if that's the correct phrasing, if that's even right phrasing. I didn't always love my middle name, Joy, because I didn't always think it was me and applied to me, and I just never felt I didn't always feel like I was a joyful person because of my struggles with my health and my depression and all the adversity I have faced in my life. So when she wrote, "Thank you for your joy," on this receipt, even though I was in one of my funks, I guess I was doing something right, and I will never forget that as long as I live. And something else about that that really was just so huge for me is just being seen. If you're somebody who has depression, has dealt with depression, you know how lonely it is, and you know how you feel invisible and how you feel worthless. maybe you feel different things, but that's how I've felt with my depression. And for someone to see me like that meant everything to me. It was like, "Oh, I'm not invisible. People care. People are paying attention." Because when you feel so sad, you just want someone to see you, and you want, comfort, and you want joy, and you want safety, and to be seen in those moments. It was such a minor interaction with this woman, but I just felt so many things, and I remember these details so clearly, obviously, and it's been a really long time since this moment. And yeah, like I said, I'll just never forget it. And I really too want to just point out that random acts of kindness really go a long way, and you never know how you are impacting somebody. You don't. Just by doing something small, whether it's, asking someone if you could pray for them and just leaving them a nice tip, whether it's paying for the person behind you's food, or someone who's behind you in the drive-through, holding a door for somebody, telling someone you love their outfit or their shoes or their hair. Just it costs you basically nothing, but you never know how that's gonna impact somebody. Like, I'm sure that woman had no idea how much that was going to mean to me, and here I am, like, 10 years later, around there, roughly, and it's something that still means so much to me and something I remember so vividly. And, truthfully, there were so many things that helped with my depression in the short term and that kept it at bay sometimes. And I think it's really important to talk about here because, and this is no shade ever. I'm never coming from a place of judgment. If antidepressants are something that's going to help you, absolutely frigging go for it. What's best for you? Yes. Yes. I never went on antidepressants, but I noticed when I was constantly moving my body, not only did it help my narcolepsy, but it helped me feel better because exercise is such an antidepressant, you guys. It doesn't have to be anything drastic. Jogging, walking, body weights, strength training. I had written in one of my diaries recapping on a year, and I was like, "Wow, I wasn't sad a lot this year, and I think it's because I was working out a lot." And, when you're also are feeling sad and depressed, you don't really want to be around people because you just kinda wanna wallow in your sadness, and it's really interesting because community really is the antidote as well, I think, and being around loved ones and community in the right setting, I think is also very, very helpful. And a huge thing, and this is where I wanna talk about what made my depression and these sporadic depressive episodes go away completely, is changing my diet. I started working with a hormone health coach because at the time I was trying to get off birth control without any side effects because birth control and trying to get off birth control hit me with a bunch of side effects, right? But with through working with this hormone health coach, she also helps me work on diet, and I learned how to fuel my body properly and how to eat whole foods and to supplement with really basic supplements. And I it was such an eye opener of like, wow, I really don't eat very well, or I thought I was eating good, but I really wasn't. And, just being aware of additives in food and reading the ingredient labels and all of that. So it was 3 months of working with this health coach and really just, changing my diet, among other things. But, nutrition and diet was a main component of this program. But I kid you not, you guys, once I completely changed my diet to whole foods, organic when possible, and learning to make meals at home, complete meals, with your complex carbs and your high quality protein and your healthy fats, my depression went away forever, and I have never had a random spurt of depression again. I've never had it come back in any capacity, and it blew my mind. It blew my mind. Food really, truly is medicine. And if you haven't addressed that part and you just go straight to antidepressants, again, no shade, no shade. I want to put it out there that also maybe it's worth your while to start working on your nutrition, to start moving your body, to get sunshine, consistent sunshine. Because whoever went out into the sunshine and came back and was like, I feel more sad? I don't think anybody's ever said that. But yeah, I just wanna encap this episode with just honing in on that point. Food is medicine. Move your body. Sit in some sunshine because those fundamental foundational things do so much for your mental health, for your mood, more than you think. More than you think. And it changed my life. And again, I am so, so grateful to be at a place in my life where depression is a thing of my past. It's not something that ever comes within my vicinity, thankfully, but I very much know what it is like to deal with years upon years of depression. But thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the Reformed Tired Girls Club podcast, and I will see you next week.